Oblation. In the medieval period, many monks did not choose their profession. They were given to the church as boys through the legal process of oblation. This was particularly common among noble families who had more sons than they could provide land for. At the age of 5 or 7, a boy would be brought to the monastery gates where his parents formally renounced their authority over to him. He was then placed under the care of the master of the children. From that day on, the boy lived with the cloister, learning to read and write Latin and memorizing the complex musical notations of the Psalms. He was raised entirely apart from secular society, trained from infancy for the life of religious service. Novitiate. When the boy reached his late teens, he transitioned from a student into a novice. This was a probationary year designed to test whether he could handle the psychological and physical rigors of the rule. If the abbot approved of his conduct, he then underwent the ritual of the tonsure. This involved a senior monk shaving the hair from the crown of his head, leaving a distinct ring. This was a permanent legal marker. In the eyes of the law, the tonsure granted him the benefit of the clergy, meaning he could only be tried in church courts rather than secular ones. It also signalled his civil death, as he officially forfeited his family name and any claims to his father's estate or inheritance. Profession of vows. Following the novitiate, the young man took his final vows in a formal ceremony before the community. He stood in the abbey church and swore to 3 core principles: poverty, chastity, and obedience. By swearing poverty, he agreed that he would never own property again. Even his robe and quill belonged to the monastery. By swearing obedience, he placed his entire life under the absolute command of the abbot. He then exchanged his secular clothing for the monastic habit, which was usually made of undyed or black wool. This garment served as his daily uniform for the rest of his life, identifying him to the public as a person who had legally withdrawn from the world. Divine Office. The monk's adult life was strictly regulated by a schedule known as the Divine Office. This was a cycle of 8 prayer services that divided the 24-hour day into specific blocks. His day usually began in total darkness at approximately 2 a.m., when he was woken for matins and lauds, 2 prayers of the day. After a few more hours of sleep, he would rise again for prime at daybreak. Throughout the day, bells would ring for the prayers terce, sext, non, and vespers, and finally compline before bed. This schedule was designed to ensure that no more than a few hours ever passed without the community gathering to sing the psalms. The monk's primary job was this constant prayer, which was believed to be a vital service for the spiritual safety of the kingdom. Scriptorium. Because he was literate, a monk would spend several hours of each day working in the Scriptorium. This was the monastery's office and library, where documents were drafted and books were copied. In an era before the printing press, every book was a handcrafted object made of vellum, which was a processed animal skin. The monk would sit at a slanted wooden desk, holding a quill made from goose feather and ink made from oat galls. His work was meticulous and physically demanding. He had to maintain perfect handwriting while sitting in unheated rooms for hours. Through this labour, monasteries became the primary storehouse of history, law, and theology, preserving manuscripts that would have otherwise been lost to time. Communal silence. Social interaction within the monastery was limited by a strict code of silence. In areas like the church, the dormitory, and the refectory, speaking was often forbidden to prevent distractions and maintain discipline. To manage the logistics of daily life, such as asking for a specific tool or a certain type of food, the monks utilized a sophisticated system of hand signs. This was a functional sign language where specific gestures represented common nouns and verbs. This allowed the monastery to function like a high-speed machine. Work was completed and meals were served in near total silence. The monks spent decades living in a crowded community where verbal communication was rare, focusing instead on the internal recitation of the liturgy. Infirmary and retirement. As the monk entered old age, he was eventually relieved of heavy manual labour and long hours in the Scriptorium. If he became too ill or too frail to attend the midnight services, he was moved to the infirmary. This was a separate building within the monastery complex that functioned as a hospital. In the infirmary, the strict dietary rules of the monastery were often relaxed. The elderly were allowed to eat meat and sit by a fire, luxuries that were usually forbidden to healthy monks. The infirmary was a brother trained in basic medieval medicine who used herbs grown in the cloister garden to treat his patients. The monk's final years were spent in this quiet environment, preparing for the end of his service. Death. When the monk died, his funeral was a communal event that followed a standardized legal and religious trial. His body was washed and dressed in his best habit, then placed on a bier in the center of the church for a requiem mass. After the service, the brothers carried him to the monastery's private cemetery, which was usually located just outside the east end of the church or within the cloister itself. He was typically buried in a simple grave without a coffin, emphasizing his vow of poverty even in death. His name was then entered into the monastery's necrology, a book used to ensure that he would be mentioned in the community's prayers every year on the anniversary of his death. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to look out for the next one.